Hello, wonderful people. What an amazing event, right? This is like a Bitcoiner's dream come true. Back in 2014, when I started running Bitcoin meetups, guess how many people showed up to my first Bitcoin meetup? One person. He called me crazy, he told me Bitcoin is imaginary, and he told me to stop the nonsense and move on with my life. I'm so glad I did not move on with my life because look, just 10 years later, we're having a Bitcoin, the largest Bitcoin event in the capital of capital, Abu Dhabi, and I'm so excited to see all of you, and I'm mostly excited to have this fantastic panel. So we have representatives from the largest exchanges here, and I'll let you introduce yourself very briefly.
Thanks, Irina. It's good to be back in Abu Dhabi. My name is Vishal. I head up regional markets at Binance. Been with Binance for about 3 years, overseeing our regulatory and licensing operations globally. Prior to this, I was a regulator myself. This is where me and Irina first met with the ADGM and the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. I think I met most of these guys during those days. It's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you to the Bitcoin media team for coming to Abu Dhabi. We've been going to the conference for a long time, so we're really excited to see it here in the UAE. My name is AJ Nelson. I'm the co-founder of Rain. Rain is an exchange here in the GCC and the MENA region. We first got our license with the Central Bank of Bahrain in 2018 and recently got our license with ADGM here in Abu Dhabi last year. Excited to be on the panel.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sudhu Arumugam. I'm the Chief Product Officer at M2. M2 is about a year old. We're from Abu Dhabi, so this is home. And our focus really is around the UAE and the region first, and then sort of more globally second. You could be seen really as an asset management platform where exchange trading and other services are kind of ancillary to the core. My personal background is almost 8 years in crypto, and before that, 20 years out of London in derivatives, where I used to run one of the teams for Merrill's and DRW and other large hedge funds.
If the organizers can spot us another mic, that would be fantastic. M2, one of the main sponsors, I can see them from here sitting without a mic. One mic. No? Okay, I tried. Talking about the regulations and how the UAE is approaching the regulation of Bitcoin, I'm so glad we are in this, I would call, a very sane jurisdiction. We've never had an issue where Bitcoin was banned. We've never had an issue where there was a question whether Bitcoin is a security, and let's prohibit everybody from buying it because, you know, we're protecting people. On contrary, the UAE has taken an approach of regulating the virtual asset services provider. So if you're an exchange, if you're a broker who is accepting money from clients, you are the one that is being regulated, which is what you want to see, right? You don't want your exchange to run away with your money, with your Bitcoin, with your other assets. But that's not the case with other jurisdictions, and that's not the case with other countries. So Binance is regulated in 20-plus jurisdictions, and you have the pleasure of dealing with regulators around the world. So Vishal, can you please talk about how other jurisdictions are approaching Bitcoin specifically and VASPs in general?
If you look globally, you can actually put down regulators and regulations and jurisdictions in 3 buckets. So one, like you said, they're ones that don't want to do anything with the space. It's a blanket ban on Bitcoin and any other cryptocurrency that's out there. The second is the ones that have, like what the UAE did initially. It's like a wait and watch approach. Let's see it, let's allow it, and then as we progress, as the industry matures, we'll create regulations around it. And the third, again, taking examples of Central Bank of Bahrain, ADGM, that actually came up and said, you know what, we get the space, we understand it. Let's create regulations around it and then try and regulate the market. So you're going to see what we've been witnessing, especially in the last couple of years, are people moving through the different stages of the bucket, from no regulation to wait and watch to regulation, and it's progressing. I think 2024 is a landmark year in terms of the regulations, allowing Bitcoin ETFs. That was a start. That brought in your institutional players. So once the regulators started seeing that approach and seeing that the governments that were previously against it, allowing this to happen, I think the mood has shifted considerably in 2024.
Yes, absolutely. And people always ask me, right? I'm a lawyer. What are you doing in the Bitcoin space? You know, Bitcoin should not be regulated. But nobody's talking about regulating Bitcoin. We're talking about regulating projects, companies that are taking the client's money in order to give you Bitcoin in exchange. This is what you want to regulate. AJ, talk to us about your experience with ADGM, which is one of the regulators. And Vishal, I'm not going to ask you about this because you're slightly biased, being a former regulator yourself. Talk to us about the regulator in ADGM and also the Bahrain Central Bank, because Bahrain Central Bank of Bahrain was the first regulator in the Middle East that issued licenses for exchanges.
Don't piss anyone off, AJ.
Yes, thank you, Irina. And Vishal used to be my regulator, so I'll make sure to be polite. But the ADGM and both the Central Bank of Bahrain and the CBB have been a pleasure to work with. We think that, I think I could probably speak for all three of us, that regulation in Bitcoin exchanges and Bitcoin companies is really crucial. You know, we've seen many, if you've been in the industry for as long as we have, you've seen too many examples of, you know, lending companies, exchanges, anyone that takes customer deposits blow up, right? And it's a real shame if you go back in history and you look at all the Bitcoin that's been lost because of this issue, right? So I think that with both regulators, they were very early. As you mentioned, the Central Bank of Bahrain issued the first license to Rain in, I believe, August of 2019. So that was very early. And then, you know, the UAE and the ADGM was issuing licenses in 2021 or 2020?
No, the framework came out in 2018.
Yeah, framework came out in 2018. So very early, right? And I think that both countries really realized that protecting customer deposits is the main priority. And when you speak with these regulators, that's mostly what they care about. You know, I think when you look around the globe, as Vishal was saying, there's a lot of discussions happening. You know, in America, in the U.S., and Europe, historically, it's more around taxation, or can we create a legal framework for this new asset or this money to exist? You know, here in the region, I think we've been fortunate that that hasn't been a part of the discussion at all. We've just been able to operate, and mostly they just dig really into customer deposits, custody, and the things that really do matter in this space.
Absolutely. And just in case somebody doesn't know, in the UAE there are 5 regulators that regulate virtual assets. Bitcoin is defined as a virtual asset. And you'll get a prize if you name all of the 5 regulators at the end of the panel. So I don't know what the price is, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. Sudhu, M2 is one of the younger kids on the block, on the crypto block in the UAE. You broke into the scene last year with your regulatory license in ADGM, and also with Black Eyed Peas performing for half of the UAE. That was a fantastic opening. So, but you also operate in other jurisdictions, and you're also looking at licenses in other European jurisdictions. Your shareholder is looking at receiving a stablecoin license in the UAE. Talk to us about the focuses that you have in a wider adoption scheme.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, in the UAE, the regulator moved in sort of 2018, and why did they do that? Well, frankly, in my view, they saw that as an opportunity to get businesses from Hong Kong and Singapore to come this way and set up, right? And which they did a really, really good job. So whilst it's great for us here, our licenses do not passport into, say, Europe. And so what do exchanges like Rain, Binance, and ourselves do for Europe? And it's not simple. Now, Europe is a one pan-European jurisdiction, and there's MiCA, which comes into force in a few weeks, essentially. And exchanges and platforms like ourselves have to decide, how do we engage with other jurisdictions? Is it from a reverse solicitation only? Do we get a VASP license, which we then have to convert into a CASP license? Do we go in through, say, Germany with a BaFin partner? Do we go through Slovenia, Cyprus? So these are quite complex and expensive decisions that we have to make. I mean, right now, as SM2, we're regulated out of Bahamas and by the FSRA and ADGM. But as we move beyond these shores, these kinds of decisions will become more and more important. As for the stablecoin, we did originally look at a dollar stablecoin out of ADGM, but as I understand it, dollar-backed stablecoins can't be used for goods and services, but dirham-backed coins can. And so, we are 70% owned by Abu Dhabi Inc., 30% owned by the Phoenix Group, which is a publicly listed miner on on the ADX. And it's the Phoenix Group has the partnership with Tether and another third party to bring a AED-backed, a dirham T type stablecoin to the market. Now there are other dirham stablecoins as well, so it's going to be very interesting to see how this space evolves.
Yes, and us being in the UAE, we don't have the benefit of relaxing and enjoying our life, right? We always have to be on our toes because there's new regulatory movements coming in, there's new projects coming in, so we always have to be aware at all times. There's one criticism that I get all the time on social media. You're a Bitcoin maxi and you're talking about the regulations. Shame on you, because all the regulations do just stop the innovation, just stop the progress, and we should just do what we do. So what would your answer be to that, Vishal?
Regulations have never stifled innovation, especially if you look at the UAE, be it ADGM, be it Dubai, be it whoever it is. You've never, even with the fintech space, right? Crypto came now. Think of it before, like 10 years ago. I think there was always a push for innovation. There's always been that, don't be scared of it. Let's try and figure it out together. So the people, God bless them, whoever has been, either they're jealous or they just don't get it. So it can be either one of the two. But I don't think the UAE has ever stifled innovation throughout its existence.
That's the UAE. What about Europe? I mean, the only thing I see coming out of Europe is the bureaucracy and the regulations. They have the first AI Act in Europe, but they have zero AI companies. AJ, what are you going to say? Vishal says that regulation don't stop the innovation. What's your say on that?
I think they probably do. That they definitely slow innovation down. But as I mentioned in my first comment in the last question, it's always a balancing act, right? Because at the end of the day, you are either allowing these companies to compete in a complete Wild West, right? Where there's no rule of law, there's no regulation, it's not fitting into any legal framework. This is where we began 10 years ago, right? And there was tons of innovation happening at that time, but there's tons of scams. There was tons of exchanges going bust, tons of projects stealing money. So I think it is you see many examples in the world of regulators that lean in and get it right, like here in the UAE. And then you see many examples of the very opposite side of the spectrum. As you mentioned in Europe, where they're blocking USDT, they're blocking many other things. So I want to be fair to the regulators that I think, yes, it does stifle innovation. It absolutely slows innovation down. But at the same time, it likely does save customer deposits. So it's a balancing act that you have to think about. And it's not an easy job.
Sudhu, please. So it's a balancing act, as we discussed. So how is UAE balancing it so well in comparison with other jurisdictions?
I think, by being very open and interacting with the participants in the space, right? The two-way dialogue. I think, the FSRA is coming out with a consultation doc. They want to see, what do we want to see as asset management platforms and exchanges? What do we want to see the regulatory landscape? What products do we want to bring inside the perimeter? Now, the tricky thing, I think, for all of these guys is how are they going to interact with DeFi? Because I think DeFi is obviously where the biggest piece of innovation is going on, to this date, and how we merge, DeFi into the kind of CeFi regulated perimeter where it's sort of permissioned but non-custodial, and whoever does that best, I think, is going to take a real leap forwards. And it's not clear who that is. Now, my money's on a UAE regulator because they're at least engaging with the participants, unlike, say, in Europe, for example, where, as you mentioned, I think at least, even a year ago, they were saying a DeFi platform had to have an office, with an address in Europe, and people were just looking at them like you're mad. I mean, it made no sense. Whereas at least the ADGM, they started, bringing regulation around DAOs, and now they're looking at DeFi, and sure, Vara is doing the same too. So now, also, why do we need regulation? Because Irina, you're BTC Max, and you love your privacy, and you don't want KYC, and AML specifically, but to bring institutions into our perimeter, you have to do this, and this is where everyone wants. I love saying this, and it's, I think, still true. Everyone wants the other person KYC except themselves, right? And it doesn't work like that.
So in my mind, also the regulations play very close role with the public perception. Yes, you might have your regulatory license. Yes, you might be all squared away with the regulators. But there's a public perception that this exchange might not be safe, secure, and my assets might not be safe. As the largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance, how do you manage the public perception? Especially, let's address the elephant in the room. You have two monitors appointed, but you are doing a lot of work now in the compliance space. But the public perception is not won very easily. How do you manage that?
Having a license does not change the public perception of you being safe. There have been instances in the past where license exchanges have been hacked. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the security that you implement, right? On the compliance side, you're right. We have invested a lot in our compliance, especially this year, especially the last 2 years, in fact. And having the US monitors just changes that perception again about how well we are run from a compliant perspective to make sure that we are in adherence with the resolutions of last year. Now, when you go back to the regulators again, it's about, like both of them, AJ and Sid, he mentioned, it's all about having the kind of conversations with the industry. You won't understand innovation unless you have those conversations. I knew from an ADGM perspective, even before rolling out the ADGM's licensing framework, we used to have those conversations with the industry players, with multiple of them. Even before we went live, we were talking to Rain about what they would like to see in a framework. And I think regulators who've got that part right, who have understood it and understood why you need to bring out these regulations, they get it. Then you look into the compliance side. Then you look into the IT infrastructure side. Then you look at the market manipulation, the surveillance, and all the kind of stuff, the good things that come with it. But unless you understand the product, what is Bitcoin? How does it help? How does it help you? What problems do they solve? Do they solve a problem? Once you answer those questions, then it's easy to kind of build a framework around it that's acceptable and palatable to the industry in itself.
That's interesting. Talking about how many people currently hold Bitcoin, we were just discussing it a second ago, and we've estimated even if one address, Bitcoin address, equals one person, less than 0.5% of the population, of the world's population, holds Bitcoin nowadays. So we are so early. So AJ, when it comes to bringing on more users into the ecosystem, do you see exchanging playing a role, or do you think exchanges are more, good for other purposes? Altcoins, probably derivatives? What's your thoughts on this?
I think the answer is probably all of the above. As you mentioned, let's say if we round up 1% of the entire world has purchased Bitcoin, or holds some form of Bitcoin, and that's a very, very small percentage, right? If we compare Bitcoin to the internet, I think we're probably somewhere maybe approaching 2,000, right? We're maybe in 1997 or 1998, where I think roughly there's 150 million people who have bought Bitcoin, who have interacted with Bitcoin, who may have a Bitcoin address. In the grand scheme of things, there's 7 or 8 billion people on this planet. Every single person on this planet interacts with money, and if Bitcoin does what the internet did to data, we probably have another 10, 15, 30 years before we really know what the companies, the use cases, the entire landscape looks like. So I do think that exchanges play a very important role, obviously, in today's ecosystem, and likely will continue playing a very important role in the future. But if you look at finance in general, it's very, very wide, right? And I think that Bitcoin has the chance to replace each and every feature of the financial system. So if you think of it in terms like that, the companies and the use cases that won in 1997 are very different than the use cases and the companies that are winning, in 2024, at least with internet companies.
Sudhu, every time people ask me, shall I buy Bitcoin? What is the best price to buy Bitcoin at? I always say, do not ask me anything about the price. Instead, go learn what Bitcoin is and what it's good for. And once you find that out, you will not have to ask anyone ever again if you should or should not buy Bitcoin, because the answer would be obviously yes. I really like the materials that M2 puts out, educational materials, also the reports. So as a large ecosystem player, because exchanges is quite important ecosystem players, I would absolutely agree with AJ. What role do you see in educating the general audience? What role do you see in probably, the more educated audience we have, the more users you'll have, and the less people will be likely to get scammed, because we do have quite a few scammers running around. So what role do you see exchanges playing in that regard?
Yeah, look, I think exchanges have to play a very, very important role. It's a responsibility of every exchange. If you look at spot exchanges, and given the great difficulty to this day to do banking, spot exchanges are very localized businesses. Binance aside, pretty much everyone has a local niche. Even in Europe, for example, if you look at spot, the on-ramp side of it, there are many exchanges which are way, way bigger than Binance for their local market. And the reason is banking. And so if you're going to offer banking and offer on-ramping, you also have to take on the responsibility of education as well. And, we dedicate a lot around learn to earn, so does Rain, so does Binance. And I think it's not a nice to have. I think it's our responsibility to do so, to show people the risk, the advantage, the pros, the cons, to bring on the next 1% and the next 1%.
One of the most interesting things that happened quite recently was the President Trump announcing a Bitcoin reserve for the US. As the largest country in the world, they're specifically talking about Bitcoin. We couldn't have dreamt about president elections hinging on Bitcoin position, right? That's quite a new shift of timelines here. So very quickly, we have a few minutes left. Which of the next regulators or central banks in the region, or maybe wider, you think will announce a Bitcoin reserve, or should they do that?
Well, the ones that would do it would not be public about it. They will do it on their own. They might do it through sovereign wealth funds, but very few will be actually public about it. And El Salvador is an example that went public about their Bitcoin reserves, and he's been posting on Instagram about his reserves and what prices they're at. But a lot of people who don't need to, they won't talk about it. And that's how a lot of the countries operate, right? But for more public countries like the ones you just mentioned, they might actually have rules. They might come up with regulations that actually focus on how you should be having your reserves set up on the side.
AJ, your bet. What's the next country?
I would love to know the specific country. I don't. I hope that it's one of the Gulf countries, one of the countries here in the GCC. Since we're in the UAE today, I hope it's the UAE, and obviously all three of our companies are here to speak with the regulators and the central bank. That being said, one comment is just on President Trump, the President-elect Trump getting elected. Is I do think we sped up the timeline of Bitcoin very, very massively. I think Bitcoin, is likely to become the next global reserve currency, at some point in the distant future. I think we just shaved off, 5, 10, maybe 15 years on that timeline, and I think things will probably start happening really fast in 2025. So you may see many countries doing it.
Look, I don't tend to believe what Trump says, but if you look at Paul Atkins, who is the SEC chair-elect, if you look at David Sachs, who is the AI crypto czar, these guys have a lot of history in either regulatory, SEC or in crypto. David Sachs, for example, has been an LP in Multicoin, and Multicoin have been in the space, well regarded, big holders of Solana from the inception. So I do believe something's coming. I'm not as bothered about countries as corporates. I think corporates have got way bigger balance sheets. Countries have got budgetary issues, and for me to see more and more corporates coming out, I spoke to someone I know at Google who's at the Treasury Department last night to say, look, are you guys talking about Bitcoin? And they said yes. They've been asked to put together a paper, but they're not allowed to go unless there is a domino effect. So if Microsoft are in and Amazon are in, they will have to come in, and I'm much more interested in that than India or someone bringing in BTC, which is great, but the corporates have some real buying power here.
So which corporate will be the domino effect? Will start the domino effect?
I think it has to start with the FANG stocks. I think if those guys set the trend, I think everyone's going to fly in. So,
anybody else is excited about the corporate treasuries or the government treasuries? No, nobody's excited. Oh yeah, there's lots of excited people there. Well, that's been all from us. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for participating. And the speakers will be here. Please come and find them and ask them questions.
Thank you.
Is your company ready for the next evolution in financial strategy? Bitcoin for Corporations is your partner in securing the future of your business. With exclusive membership benefits, our comprehensive masterclass, and a network of trusted service providers, we provide the insights and resources to help you incorporate Bitcoin into your financial strategy, ensuring stability and long-term value. Strengthen your business. Innovate with confidence. Bitcoin for Corporations, protecting your treasury and positioning you for the future.